The seaside diner sat at the edge of the little port town, a worn neon sign buzzing faintly in the morning mist. The air inside smelled of coffee, salt, and fried eggs. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where gossip was passed with the sugar and cream. Martha Kolesnikova came every Thursday, like she had for years. She always wore the same soft gray coat and a blue scarf that had once been her husband's. Her hands trembled slightly when she held her teacup, but her eyes were warm, and her voice gentle enough to calm even the crankiest fisherman. The staff adored her. She never complained, always tipped, and always asked about their families. That morning was no different, until the door banged open, rattling the glass. A man stumbled in, tall, broad, and loud. His coat smelled of liquor and smoke, and his boots tracked mud across the tiled floor. Ivan Rudnev. Everyone in town knew the type, just not him. Outsider. Trouble. He barked at the waitress before he even sat down. Coffee. And make it strong. Not that dishwater you people serve. The young waitress, Tanya, gave a nervous smile and hurried away. The regulars at the counter exchanged uneasy glances. Nobody liked the look in his eyes, mean, restless, searching for something to break. When Tanya brought his mug, his hand shot out too fast, snatching it, spilling a little across the counter. "Watch it," he snarled. Martha, sitting nearby, flinched at the sound. She reached for a napkin, instinctively rising to help. "Oh, dear, let me just." The cloth brushed his sleeve. His head snapped toward her. "What do you think you're doing, old woman?" I'm sorry, I didn't mean." Before anyone could move, he shoved her away, hard enough that she stumbled backward and hit the floor. The mug shattered. The diner went dead silent. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The jukebox still hummed faintly in the corner, a love song suddenly obscene in the quiet. Tanya gasped and ran to Martha's side, helping her sit up. A bruise already darkened on the widow's wrist. Ivan muttered something about clumsy hands, and reached for his coffee again, but the eyes around the room had changed. The old men at the counter stared in disbelief. Even the cook in the back leaned out from behind the swinging doors, his face pale. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, voice trembling. Ivan looked up, sneering. "Yeah, why not?" The cook swallowed. "That's Victor's mother." A few people nodded, their silence heavy as a verdict. Ivan frowned. "And who the hell is Victor?" No one answered, but the hush that followed carried the weight of something sharp and dangerous, like the moment before a storm breaks. Ivan looked around, confused, irritated, still thinking this was just another day, another place he could throw his weight around. No one told him that Martha's son had once worn a uniform that turned men like him into ghosts before they ever saw him coming. Night came early in the little town. A thin rain fell, tapping softly against the window of Martha Kolesnikova's small house by the harbor. Inside, the old woman sat in her kitchen, wrapped in a wool shawl, staring at the cooling cup of tea on the table. Her wrist throbbed where she'd fallen. She'd told everyone she was fine, waved off the offers to call the police, but her hand still trembled when she lifted the cup. The bruise had bloomed purple and blue beneath her paper-thin skin. She tried not to look at it. Instead, her eyes drifted to the photograph on the wall, her son, Victor, in his naval uniform. The frame was old, the glass slightly cracked at the corner, but his eyes still held the same intensity, the same unyielding calm. He'd been gone a long time, stationed all over the world, doing things he never spoke about. When he came home once a year, he always hugged her carefully, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. She smiled faintly at the picture, but the smile faded as the memory of the diner returned, the shove, the shock, the sound of her own body hitting the floor. The look on people's faces. She hated the pity in their eyes more than the pain in her arm. She reached for the rotary phone on the counter. Her fingers hovered over the numbers. She told herself not to call. He was busy. He had his own life. It was just one foolish man. She didn't want to trouble her son over something so small. But her hand moved anyway. The line clicked. A faint sound of wind and ocean came through, and then a voice, low and steady, one she knew better than her own heartbeat. "Mama." She hesitated. "Vidya, I didn't mean to bother you. I just wanted to hear your voice." A pause. She could hear movement on the other end, like he was standing up. "You're not bothering me," he said. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, my dear. Just a little accident at the diner. I'm fine now." "An accident?" His tone sharpened, quiet but edged. "What kind of accident?" She tried to make it sound trivial. "Oh, some rude man. He pushed me, that's all. The people there helped me up. You don't need to worry." There was silence on the line, but it wasn't empty. She could hear his breathing, calm, controlled, but deeper than before. "Mama," he said slowly, "what was his name?" "I don't know. He's new in town. Big fellow. Drank too much, I think." He didn't respond for a long moment. The faint hum of waves filled the space between them. "Vidya," she said softly, "please don't do anything foolish." "You know me," he replied, his voice steady but cold. "I don't do foolish things." And then, quieter, almost to himself, "He touched you." "Victor, I'm all right. Truly." He exhaled through his nose, a slow, measured sound, the kind of breath soldiers take when deciding something final. "I'll be home soon, Mama." The line went dead before she could answer. She sat there for a moment, the receiver still pressed to her ear, the rain whispering against the window. Outside, the sea was dark and restless. Somewhere far across that water, her son was already on the move. The morning broke gray and cold, the kind of day when the horizon seemed to blur into the sea. Down by the harbor, gulls circled low over the water, their cries echoing between the shuttered warehouses. The townspeople went about their routines in subdued silence. Word had spread overnight that Viktor Kolesnikov was coming home. Nobody had called him. Nobody needed to. The story of what had happened at the diner had made its way through every street, every shop, every whispered conversation. And though no one said it aloud, everyone knew what that meant. By mid-morning, the sound of an engine rolled through the mist, low and steady, not rushed, not hesitant. A black pickup truck appeared on the main road, tires crunching against gravel. It was clean, too clean for a vehicle that had just crossed half the country. Inside sat a man whose face the town remembered but whose presence felt heavier now, like the air itself shifted to make room for him. Victor stepped out, dressed in worn jeans, a dark jacket, and boots scuffed from long service. His movements were quiet, efficient. He wasn't a large man, not bulky like his mother's attacker, but there was something about the way he carried himself, a stillness that drew the eye, an authority that didn't need to be spoken. He stood for a moment, looking around. The town hadn't changed much since he'd last seen it. The same rusted fishing boats, the same wind-worn houses, the same diner on the corner with its flickering sign. He walked toward it with calm, measured steps. Inside, the seaside diner was nearly empty. The smell of bacon and old coffee hung in the air. Tanya, the waitress from that day, froze when she saw him. Her eyes widened, relief, fear, respect all tangled together. "Victor," she whispered. You came." He gave a small nod. "How is she?" "She's home. She's okay, I think." "Shaken up." Tanya hesitated. "He's been here every morning since." "The man who did it brags about it. Says she fell on her own." Victor's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "Still here now?" Tanya swallowed. "Out front. Smoking." "Good." He stepped past her toward the door. "Victor," she reached out as if to stop him, then let her hand fall. Whatever she saw in his face told her words wouldn't matter. Outside, Ivan Rudnev leaned against the hood of a dented car, a cigarette dangling from his mouth, laughter spilling from him and two other men. His voice carried easily over the street, crass and careless. "Old Bat nearly cried. You'd think I broke her bones." He guffawed, slapping one of his companions on the shoulder. Victor crossed the street without a sound. The laughter faded as Ivan noticed the stranger approaching. "You hit my mother," Victor said quietly. Ivan squinted, confused. "What? My mother? You shoved her?" "In the diner." The others glanced at each other uneasily. Ivan smirked. "Oh, you mean that nosy old lady? What, you her boy?" "She's fine. Tell her to stay out of my way next time." Victor didn't blink. His voice stayed calm, but every syllable carried precision, like it had been measured before leaving his mouth. "Apologize." Ivan laughed, a harsh sound that died quickly when he saw Victor didn't flinch. "You're serious?" "Yes." The street was empty except for them. Even the gulls seemed to have gone silent. Ivan flicked his cigarette to the ground and squared his shoulders, towering over the smaller man. "Listen, soldier boy." But Victor's eyes had already changed. That calmness had shifted into focus, a kind of quiet calculation that men like Ivan had never seen before. "Not soldier," Victor said softly. "Sailor. Special operations." Ivan hesitated, uncertain whether to laugh again or step back. He never got the chance to decide. Victor took one step closer, the space between them charged with something heavy and inevitable. The townspeople watching from behind curtained windows knew what came next would not be a fight. It would be a lesson. The street seemed to hold its breath. The air was damp with sea mist, and the only sound was the faint hiss of the wind through the wires overhead. Ivan Rudnev shifted his stance, puffing out his chest, trying to look bigger, meaner, trying to convince himself that the stranger standing before him was just another man. But Victor wasn't just another man. He moved like someone who'd spent years learning the rhythm of violence, how to see it before it happened, how to end it before it began. His shoulders were loose, his eyes steady, his hands relaxed at his sides. Every instinct in Ivan's body screamed that something was wrong, but pride kept him from backing down. "I don't know what your problem is," Ivan growled. "Your mother's fine. Maybe she shouldn't." He didn't finish. Victor stepped forward so fast it didn't look real. One hand caught Ivan's wrist mid-gesture, the other pressed against his chest. With a twist that looked effortless, Victor spun the larger man around, forcing his arm up between his shoulder blades until his knees buckled. The move was clean, efficient, practiced. Ivan gasped, his face twisted in pain, the air leaving his lungs in a single sharp grunt. "Stop it, stop, I told you to apologize," Victor said, voice low but steady. He wasn't yelling, he didn't need to. His calmness was worse than shouting, it carried certainty. Ivan tried to jerk free, but Victor shifted his weight slightly, and the motion sent a sharp crack through the man's shoulder. Ivan froze, panting. The two bystanders who had been with him had already backed away, their bravado evaporating in the presence of something they couldn't quite name. Victor leaned closer, his mouth near Ivan's ear. "Do you know what it's like to make a man disappear?" he asked quietly. "To end him, and never have to think about it again." Ivan made a choked sound, somewhere between fear and disbelief. "I do," Victor continued. "But I won't do that to you. Because she raised me better." He released him abruptly. Ivan stumbled forward, barely catching himself. He turned, face red, humiliated, one arm limp at his side. "Apologize to her," Victor said again. Ivan spat on the ground. "You think you scare me?" Victor's eyes didn't waver. "No," he said, "I know I don't need to." Then, before Ivan could blink, Victor's fist moved, not a wild swing, but a precise strike to the stomach, deep enough to knock the wind out of him without breaking anything vital. Ivan doubled over, wheezing. Victor stepped back and let him collapse to his knees. The door to the diner had opened. A few townspeople had gathered quietly at the edge of the street, Tanya, the cook, even the old men from the counter. None of them spoke. They didn't cheer, didn't intervene. They just watched. Ivan lifted his head, gasping. The fight had drained out of him. The realization had finally sunk in, that this man could have ended him and chose not to. That was worse than losing. It was being measured and found small. "Say it," Victor said. "I'm sorry," Ivan rasped, eyes fixed on the pavement. "For what?" For hitting her." "I'm sorry." Victor studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "Then leave. You don't come back here again." Ivan staggered to his feet, clutching his shoulder, shame burning brighter than pain. He didn't look at anyone as he stumbled down the street toward his car. His friends followed, silent. Victor stood there until the sound of the engine faded. The wind off the sea picked up, carrying the smell of salt and rust. Slowly, the tension in his body eased. He turned toward the diner. The townspeople parted as he walked past, not out of fear, but respect, the quiet kind that's earned, not demanded. Tanya's eyes were wet. The cook just nodded once. Victor said nothing. He opened the diner door, let it close behind him, and sat in the same booth where his mother always did. For a long moment, he stared at her empty cup still sitting on the counter, the faint ring of tea at the bottom. He reached out and placed his hand beside it, steady, scarred, still. The kind of hand that had built and broken things in equal measure. Outside, the town began to breathe again. The sun rose slow and heavy over the harbor, bleeding soft gold through the clouds. The storm that had haunted the night had passed, leaving the streets slick and shining, puddles catching bits of light. In the quiet of early morning, Martha's small house smelled of salt and warm bread. She moved carefully around her kitchen, her bruised wrist still tender but already fading. Every motion was deliberate, as though she were reminding herself that life, even after violence, continued one small act at a time. The kettle began to whistle. She turned off the flame, poured water into 2 cups, and laid out the old porcelain set she used only on special days. It was chipped at the rim, but still lovely. A knock came at the door, 3 soft taps. She didn't need to ask who it was. When she opened it, Victor stood there, wine still clinging to his jacket. Eyes tired but calm. For the first time in years, she saw him not as the quiet boy who had left home, but as something tempered by distance, by years of things she could never ask about. He gave her a small, careful smile. "Morning, Mama." She stepped aside. "Come in, Vidya. You look hungry." He laughed under his breath, that same low chuckle she remembered from when he was little, and slipped off his boots before stepping onto the wooden floor. The sound of them settling at the kitchen table felt strangely peaceful, like something that had been out of place finally returning to where it belonged. She poured tea for both of them. The silence that settled wasn't awkward, it was full, almost sacred. Steam curled between them, and the ticking of the old wall clock marked each second softly. "You didn't have to come," she said eventually. "It's all over now. I didn't want you dragged into it." He looked at her, eyes gentle. "You're my mother. You were hurt. That's enough." She sighed. "He was just a foolish man, Vidya. Probably miserable. I don't want you carrying that weight." He took a slow sip of his tea before answering. "I didn't come to hurt anyone. I came to remind him what he'd forgotten, that people like you deserve respect." Her lips trembled into a faint smile. "You sound like your father." At the mention of his father, the room seemed to soften. Victor glanced toward the window, where the morning light fell across the small framed photograph of a young sailor in uniform, broad smile, eyes full of mischief. He reached out and straightened the frame without a word. "I think about him sometimes," he said. "What he'd say if he saw me now." "He'd say he's proud," Martha replied quietly. "He always was." Outside, the sea murmured against the docks. A fishing boat was leaving port, its engine rumbling faintly in the distance. Victor watched it through the window, the corner of his mouth lifting just slightly. "Maybe I'll stay a few days," he said. "Fix that fence for you. It's been leaning for a while." Martha nodded, hiding her relief behind her teacup. "It's been waiting for your hands." For a long time, they just sat there, mother and son, surrounded by the smell of tea, salt, and quiet forgiveness. The fear, the anger, even the shadow of what had happened had begun to fade, replaced by something steadier, peace. When Victor finally spoke again, his voice was soft, almost a whisper. "You know, Mama, I've seen worse things than that man. But nothing has ever made me angrier than hearing you got hurt." She reached across the table, her frail hand resting on his. "Then promise me something," she said. "Promise you'll find a way to stop fighting, even when the world tries to give you a reason." He looked at her hand, the same hand that had held him through storms, through fear, through every distance. He nodded once. "I'll try," he said. Outside, the gulls began to call again. The light in the room grew warmer, gentler, settling on their faces like a quiet benediction. For the first time in years, Victor allowed himself to simply sit, breathe, and be her son again. And as the day slowly woke around them, Martha smiled, the kind of smile that carries both pain and pride, and thought that perhaps justice, when born of love, could still make the world right.